What's up guys, welcome back to another Coding Kaiju tutorial. My name is Diego. Once again, we are picking up right where we left off. In this episode, we're going to continue to add juice to our game. And the first thing we're going to do for that is to get this background to scroll. So if you can imagine it, when this background scrolls, it'll look like the ship is flying through space. Now, there are multiple ways we could achieve this. Obviously, we could do it with GDScript, but for this tutorial, we're actually going to implement this using shaders. So, what are shaders? Shaders in Godot are written in the Godot shading language, and this language is optimized to run on the GPU. If you feel like you were just starting to get the hang of GDScript maybe, and now I'm throwing shaders at you all of a sudden, don't worry. Shaders is its own area of expertise. There's entire books written on the subject. They're much more math heavy compared to regular programming. We're not going to be taking a deep dive into shaders today. I'm just going to introduce you to the subject so that you're aware that it exists. So in the future, you might, explore a little more yourself. All right, let's get started. Make sure you have the game scene opened and select the background node. We're here in the inspector window. Scroll down to here, this section, canvas item. We're gonna change this material property. Click the drop down. We're gonna add a new shader material. This white sphere will appear. This white sphere is supposed to be a preview of whatever material you're adding to your object. So the texture of an object, determines its color and pattern, things like that. The material is more suited for things like roughness of an object or the shininess, how it interacts with light. You'll see materials used much more often in 3D games rather than 2D. But we're going to be adding a shader, so now that we've added a material, go to this shader property and click New Shader. And go ahead and then click on the shader, and it'll open this right here. This is the editor, the text editor, where you can write shader code. So let's go ahead and write our shader. First thing you have to do in every shader is define what type of shader it is. This is going to be a canvas item. Remember, this is not GDScript. This is the Godot shading language. This one uses brackets and semicolons to define scope instead of spacing like GDScript does. Once again, don't worry if you feel like you don't really know what's going on. And once we have our shader code finished, you'll notice that our background is now auto-scrolling. It's infinite scrolling down. And that's because, like I said before, the Godot shading language runs on the GPU. And since Godot is automatically rendering this object, this background object with the shader, we will see any changes we make happen live in the editor. We don't have to run the project in order to see them. Now, if you want, you can go ahead and run the project anyway, and you can see how much better our game feels with just this small change. Notice how the asteroids are moving a little bit faster than the background, and it really makes it feel, gives this parallax effect that looks really nice. Okay, now let's talk about particles. Particles are a super simple way to get a lot of visual oomph in your game. without that much work. And like shaders, particles run on the GPU. So the first effect we're going to use particles with is having our asteroids explode. As of right now, when our asteroids blow up, it spawns multiple smaller pieces that go off in different directions. We're going to use particles to simulate, the smaller shrapnel being ejected from that explosion. So open up the game scene. And so ours is already open here. Make sure you have the game node selected. I'm gonna add a new node of type particles 2D. You would use CPU particles 2D if you were using the GLE S2 renderer, which is meant for older hardware, such as older phones. But we're gonna use the particles 2D for this one. And we're gonna rename this to particles asteroid explosion. And Control S to save. I'm gonna right click and we're gonna save this as its own scene in the objects folder. And now make sure to delete this node from the game scene, because we're actually gonna use code to spawn it. So now let's open up that particle scene. Go over here, open up the objects folder, and double click on that. All right, so we get a warning. Material to process the particles is not assigned, so no behavior is imprinted. So like the shaders, it's actually the same thing. We need, or similar thing at least, we need a process material. The other material will be over here. Go over here to the process material, and let's add a new particles material. And then make sure, go to the origin point of the X and Y axis, and then zoom in. And here you'll notice the default particles effect. It's sort of like a dripping water faucet. To scroll and zoom in, you can use the mouse wheel. You can click the mouse wheel, otherwise known as mouse 3, to pan. If you're on a laptop or something, or you don't have a mouse, you can use these buttons up here. You can also use the pan mode up here. Okay, let's get down to the nitty gritty. Go ahead and click on the particles material we just added, and a ton of options will appear. So all of these are the various properties we can set for our particle effect. It may seem overwhelming at first, but the only way you're going to learn how particles work is by jumping in. I recommend experimenting with each property as we go through them, because trying to read, the property name and the descriptions is not very helpful. The only way you're really going to get it is by experimenting and changing the value and see how it changes the effect. All right, two very important properties I want you to be aware of. This emitting property. If you turn that off, then the particle will stop emitting. So if you're ever changing things and suddenly everything disappears, check that first. The second one is this one shot. If you turn that on, it's going to turn off the particle, and you can see up here that emitting has turned off. So during testing, we're actually going to keep one shot off and keep emitting on. All right, the first thing we're going to change the amount of particles to 40. I'm going to change their lifetime to 0.5. Their explosiveness to 0.7. And the randomness to full, or to 1. Control S to save. Okay, next let's scroll down here to the particle material properties. So time and trail are going to be the default. Open up emission shape. We're going to change from point to sphere. And then we're going to change the direction, the spread, to 180. I'm going to change the gravity to 0. Okay. Let's scroll down to their velocity. They're going to have an initial velocity of 100. And look at that. Now we have the basics of an explosion. Angular velocity is going to stay at 0. Same with orbital velocity. Okay, let's scroll down. These are all going to be default. Let's go to scale. I'm going to change the scale to 5. And we're going to set a randomness value of 0.5 so that the particles will be different sizes. And then I think the last property we need to set is the color. So this color you want to choose here should be approximately the same color as your asteroids. The asteroids you're using. So if you choose the brown ones, obviously make this brown. If you chose the gray ones, make it gray. Okay. Once we're happy with that, Control S to save. Okay, again, I think you should go through each of these settings and change the values and see how they change the effect. It's the only way you're really going to learn how particles work. So I'm pretty happy with this. So let's scroll back up to the top here in the inspector window, and we're going to turn on one shot. So that way when we spawn our particles in our game, we only get one explosion. Now let's implement these particles into our game. So open up the asteroid scene and then open up its script. So as usual, the first step is to import the particle scene into our game. So I'm going to just do it up here. Var explosion underscore particles underscore scene equals load. And then remember, you can always click and drag the scene you want to load, and it'll automatically fill in the path information for you. Now I'm going to write a new function under this explode function. Underscore, I'm going to call it explosion particles. So first let's instant the explosion particles. Create a new variable for that. Explosion. You can use the arrow keys to go to the autocomplete and click tab. Finish the autocomplete. We're going to instance that scene. And then we're going to set the position of the particles to be the same as the asteroid. And then we're going to call getParent and add the explosion particles to the scene from there. And we don't particles. And the reason we're calling getParent is because if you think about it, if we added the particles as a child of this asteroid scene, when we call the explode function, it's going to queue free. So the reason we don't add the particles as a child of the asteroid scene is because the asteroid is about to free itself when it explodes. When it explodes, this explode function gets called. And here at the end, it's going to free itself from memory. So therefore, we're going to add it to its parent so that the particles stay in the scene tree long enough to be visible in the game. And remember how we turned on the one-shot property in the particles? So we actually have to explicitly say we want the particles to be emitting. So set the emitting property to true. And then, like I said before, let's not forget to actually call this new function in the explode function. Let's go ahead and run the project. And you can see the cool little particle effect we've added. All right. Okay, let's add some sounds. So right underneath this explode function, we're going to define a new function called play explosion underscore sound. So let's define a new variable called explosion sound, and we're going to instance an audio stream player 2D. Let's say .new. Quick side note, since audio stream player 2D is a built-in Godot object, we use the .new function to instance it. Whereas any objects we defined ourselves, any scenes we defined ourselves, like this one, we use the .instance function to instance it. Okay. So explosion sound is of type audio stream player.2D. So let's set the stream property to go over here to the file system window. Let's open up our assets folder, go to the audio, the sound effects folder, and this is the one we want, Asteroid explosion.wave. Go ahead and click and drag that over here. And then explosion underscore sound. And we're going to change the pitch of it to, and then explosion pitch. So let's actually define that variable up top here. Var explosion underscore pitch equals 1. And you'll see why we're doing this in just a second. Where were we? Right here. Explosion underscore sound. Now let's set its position to be the same as the asteroid. And because we're using audio stream player.2D, the position matters. It affects how you hear it. And then same thing as before, we're gonna add it not as a child of the asteroid so that it doesn't get freed right away. It has time to play. And then last but not least, let's play it from the beginning. Control S to save. And then don't forget to call this new function right here in the explode function up top. Okay, now remember from before in our asteroid small function, we actually overwrote the explode function. And for that reason, we're gonna have to call these same methods. So let's go over here, copy and paste them in the same place. Make sure you get the indentation correct. So then we're going to copy this here. We're only going to copy this part, not the var, because we only need to define it once. Go over here into the asteroid small script, and before we call the play explosion sound, we're going to change explosion pitch to 1.2. Give it a little bit higher pitched for the smaller asteroids, and it just adds a little more polish to our game. All right, let's go ahead and run the project. And now, our asteroids have a sound when they explode. And then look at this night and day difference between how our game looks now and how it looked before. All right, I think we're going to stop there. As always, like the video if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to be notified when the next video comes out. And thanks for watching.